Hello everyone, my name is Ben Eady and I'm the online media manager for ModernAnalyst.com, the premier online community for business analysts. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar titled Agile Practices for BAs, Accelerating Collaboration, Integrity, and Innovation. Today's featured speakers are Jiří Wallach and Clara Chesmaro from Polarion Software. The webinar will last approximately 60 minutes including the Q&A session. So make sure to submit your questions in advance using the questions feature on the webinar software. I'd also like to say thank you to Polarion Software for sponsoring this event. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Jiří to get us started.
Hello everybody, this is Clara. I'll be the one to start. Before we start, I'd like to tell you shortly a few things about Polarion. Polarion Software is a leading innovator in web-based requirements management, quality assurance, and ALM solutions since our first product release in 2004. We serve companies of different sizes in a broad spectrum of industries. The unique differentiators include the fact that Polarion ALM is based on a single unified artifact repository orchestrated by a powerful workflow engine and 100% web-based solution that enables to streamline collaboration, transparency, and release predictability, as well as regulatory standards compliance. This is our agenda for today. So we'll have at the beginning an introduction where I will let you know why we are talking about Agile, what are the main principles, and what are the main enterprise Agile challenges. Then the longest part of the webinar will be presented by Jiří. He will speak about some solutions to these challenges and mainly about specifications, embracing change, and continuous integration and testing. Then I will have a quick conclusion, and at the end we will have about 10 minutes of questions from your side. So let's begin. Let's have a look to examine why Agile. The only constant in life is change. So this quote is so popular that you find it attributed to many people. Who said it first? To be honest, is not so important to me. But what I found it important is that all people agree with its meaning. Constant change is a reality of the business world too, and its pace is accelerating. To stay competitive, organizations need to continuously adapt to change. Unfortunately, this is easier said than done because changes can be painful, and we human beings are designed to fight the pain. So what is the alternative? Embracing the change. I remember once that I was working on a project that had 1-year release cycle, and the requirements were fixed long time in advance. Any single change would cause a lot of stress to everybody. But the market was moving fast, and I had no choice but to introduce new requests. What do you think was the result? Anger, pain, and stress. I was looking for ways to deal with the change better, and I remember that at some point I found this article named Managing Change in a Fast-Paced Market. So I thought, wow, this is exactly what I'm looking for. You know what? The main advice that I got was to take meditation classes. Meditation. Now don't get me wrong, I really believe that meditation is beneficial in calming your mind and accepting the change easier. However, I still needed to make the changes, so how do you do that? We think that actually the Agile concepts were born from the necessity of embracing the change in an easy and natural way. In effect, the organizations are able to deliver faster, better, and cheaper. Let's take a quick look at the Agile principles. This is the Agile Manifesto that was brought to light in 2001. Individuals and interactions mean that we can all agree that motivated people do their job better When you value people more than processes, you allow them to be creative, to self-organize, to be empowered, and to be trusted to do the job. At the same time, face-to-face conversations are more efficient. For the next two principles, I would like you to imagine the following situation. You invest a lot of time and money to create a product. Then you find out at the end that it is not entirely how the customer envisioned it. Sounds familiar? Wouldn't it be better if you found out about it earlier? Working software means actually delivering in short increments. This allows the customer to see the product instead of the promises on paper, to give early feedback and incorporate it into the product. Keep in mind that the quality is never negotiable. Working software also becomes a measure of success. When the team is collaborating with the customer becomes part of the team. And in effect, the product team understands the customer needs better. The customer, together with the team, might even realize that in the past they didn't know that they didn't know, and discover new requests, and the prioritization is actually done on business value. All these three principles enables the regular adaptation to changing circumstances. Imagine a world where change becomes so normal that the change is no longer a change. You might think that this is utopia. While keeping the big picture, delivering fast increments means that you are working on what is it important now. If something changes, it's a change in the future plans and not in the work done. For the team, this is seen as new work and not as a change. Now, if the Agile Manifesto was published in 2001, why is it still an actual subject in 2014? Why haven't all organizations become Agile already? Apart from the fact that it's not easy to take the people out of their comfort zone, there are actually many challenges with the strict definition of the Agile methodology, and I'll name a few. Distributed teams have to work as one team, although they cannot have face-to-face interactions, or maybe they can't even follow the same process or have different budgets. Collocating the customer with the team is most of the time not possible. There are compliance and regulations that require detailed documentation and risk mitigation. We saw teams switching to Agile methodology, seeing this as a silver bullet to solving their problems, instead of actually looking at their problems and improving their way of work. We also saw teams where Agile is applied to development team only, while having a fake waterfall-like traditional process running sideways. So the application of a strict Agile methodology doesn't answer all questions, and nor any of its variants like Scrum. Nevertheless, we believe that Agile principles are sense-making and natural. By adopting these principles as a mindset, organizations can overcome these challenges. Now, the rest of the presentation, Ivji will walk you through several examples of real software development enterprise challenges and will demonstrate how we can adopt Agile to solve them.
Hello everybody. So let's go straight into discussing our enterprise Agile experience. And start with the first topic, specification. First I introduce the basic concept and then we go through the real experience. So how do we specify what we want to deliver as part of our Agile project? It's probably the most known and understood artifact of Agile called product backlog. The product backlog is what will be delivered, commonly written in the user story format, ordered into the sequence and it should be delivered based on considerations like risks, business value, dependency, It is the product owner who represents the customer voice, and in the Agile team, and ensures the backlog is provided to the Agile team. So far, fine. But as we start speaking with the actual users, you will hear stories like the one from our customer. He's a product owner, and I'll call him Peter. So he said that I refuse to plan the customer enhancements in the product backlog, but rather plan them as defect, as they have their own dedicated sprint capacity. It's nothing new that you need to plan other activities than just user stories, such as issues, strategic features. You need to spend time on technology refactoring. You want to enhance the product by customers' enhancement requests. But the problem that Peter had is related to what was written on the previous slide. The product backlog should be the ordered set of items. For Peter, what he realized was that the customer enhancements are often valued less than the strategic features, especially when they consider factors as risk and size. And at the end of the milestone, there is never enough time to deliver the enhancements. Because of that, he just used a buffer they kept for issues, also to implement the customer enhancements. When we started analyzing his environment, we recognized that there are actually multiple objectives for their milestones. First, they definitely wanted to have the important strategic features implemented, but they also clearly needed to improve the performance and usability. They committed to constantly implement the feedback from their real customers, as well as fix their issues. The way we structure the process is maybe known to some of you, and it's called value streams. A value stream is kind of a backlog related to one kind of activity. We identified several value streams, like features, usability, performance value stream, integrations, customer enhancements, and issues. We've also realized that there are different stakeholders contributing to different value streams.
Iggy, do you mean that the classic single agile backlog is replaced by multiple value streams?
They were already multiple backlogs before, such as a product backlog, release backlog, sprint backlog. The backlog is pretty general term. We find the value stream terminology sounds better, as it highlights that each of the backlog is focused on one type of activity. So yes, very often the single backlog is replaced by multiple value streams.
I see. And these value streams are just examples, right? So every organization can define its own value streams.
Sure. The value streams listed here were just examples. We have customers with 2 or 3 value streams, or also customers with 8 of them. Peter had a pretty clear vision how much he wanted to spend on different activities. So even though he was not able to order them in one single sequence, he was able to decide how much business value each of the value stream brings. It means how much time the team should spend on the activities. There were 2 options for the organization to proceed. They can set up 1 or more teams per value stream, but they like the idea of cross-functional agile team. So they finally decided that when the sprint is planned, the stories will be packed from multiple value streams based on the strategic budget assignments. Peter said that he is able to control the budget assignment for each sprint, as it is pretty short time blocks, compared to ensure such distribution for the overall milestones. So the goal was achieved, that the sprint was planned as a sequence of items coming from multiple value streams, respecting the budget assignments he agreed on with the management team. The second suspicious message we got from Peter was, I do not want to control planning of defects because I have no time to prioritize each of them. In other words, he was trying to refuse the responsibility for one value stream, and in the future it would have happen for other streams maybe as well. He said he spent so much time on feature enhancement that he has no more time to manage anything else. We focus on the problem, as Peter was aware, that the product owner should understand all these activities so he can confirm that where the time is actually spent brings the biggest value to the customers, considering the cost, of course. So we start with review how the features value stream looks like. So the value stream was well managed. A standard prioritization process with adjusting the priority, with dragging items up and down. The backlog was used. Peter was quite technical to do a breakdown of features into the user stories, but still he was exposed to the customer side, so he was really able to order the user stories nicely into the sequence, as well as decide what is the minimum viable epic increment. So when is the right time for real customer validation? It was of course clear that it takes a lot of time to manage a features backlog like that. The same approach was not applicable for issues or defects. Often it would cost more time to analyze and order each issue than to fix it. But still, we wanted to be sure that the budget is invested in the most efficient way. We tried to understand how would he order the issues if he would do the analysis. We searched for some patterns, how to make the prioritization easier. We end up with multi-dimensional prioritization schema. The priority field was set up as a Polarion calculated field, so the priority was derived from other values, other subfields. It reflected the actual severity of a defect. Does it block the major use case? Is it just a problem with minor system interaction? But also they estimated the detection. Is the easy to detect or difficult? As the issues, they were hard to detect, might have caused other follow-up issues and might harm the users more. Is there a workaround available? Does it exist or is it easy? And the last one was occurrence. It was both estimated occurrence, but also actually computed from the automated issue system. So they really measured the number of issues being sent. It was time to fine-tune the bytes of each field, but the result was that the stakeholders that report the issues, the support team members, testers, pre- and post-sales engineers, they were able to categorize the issues like that, and the priority was set very much as a product owner wished to happen. At the end, the value stream of issues was well ordered. The issue priorities, the actual numbers, were very different to priority numbers of features, and it would be quite difficult to align them. So the value stream budget planning process was used to plan the sprints, as we saw before. But it was nice to see that any time the issue was reported again, or when the issue was more analyzed, detection or workaround was adjusted, the overall priority was changed. This followed very nicely Agile and Lean principle to do as much work as upfront as it actually needed and not more.
Describing features issues and these creative ways that you use to solve them, I think they are very useful. At the same time, I'm thinking that they might not be the only type of issues found. So can you leave us with a general advice on how to deal with them?
I mean, here what I tried to say was that in general, you should always think beyond the standard and basic Agile methodology and really think how you would like to work instead of how Agile wants you to work. It was nicely demonstrated on the example of value stream that each value stream has different items, but also might be processed very differently. The second topic we would like to cover today is about the change. We have already been told by Clara how embracing the change, how to be ready to change the scope of work anytime is important for today's business. And what we actually find out as nice and important benefit of Agile is that Agile is actually making the number of functional changes lower. So through the way you embrace a change, by the process that is set up to accept a change anytime, even late in the development process, you end up with the products that needs to be modified less. And we really speak about functional changes. Of course, your plans, the milestone plan, are changing constantly. But a change of the plan is very different to a change of something that was already done. How is this possible? The answers are pretty obvious. There's quite a nice overlap of agile and lean principles, but itself might be a nice topic for a dedicated webinar. So the fact we focus on eliminating the waste actually also help to eliminate the functional changes, even if they are welcome any time. It is the continuous backward prioritization that ensures that each sprint you work and concentrate your effort on something that the customer, product owner, consider most important. Early, but also frequent product reviews, so every 2 to 3 weeks you show the real product increments and you gather the feedback that results into adjusted user stories in the backlog. You do not need to spend time on heavy upfront specification, as it is not just the code that is costly to change, but you can also spend a lot of time on changing the specifications if you do them upfront. These agile principles and practices are really nice, and there are no major problems directly related to them. Something you should feel careful about. Our experience says that the problem is not really related if you work agile or not here. Our projects, your projects, the software projects mostly, are getting more and more complex every year. We have many customers coming from so-called mechatronics industries, producing both hardware and software together. And for example, they report that actually a lot, if not most of the innovation, happens in the software development. You can read here the story about 20 million lines of code just for multimedia system in the current S-Class Mercedes-Benz. This complexity is unbelievable and is growing every year. So you immediately realize that it is not possible to rely on the software code itself and individual understanding of the product as the only way for the project documentation. So you need to start thinking about supported documentation, e.g. component specification documents. And so you need to understand the difference between requirements and user stories. The primary reason for the specification documents is to manage the complexity of your projects, to ensure the consistency, not just the functional consistency, but also the design consistency, the user interaction consistency. There's simply no way you can do it for a project with 20 million lines of code without such supported documentation. What is important for those specification documents, if you compare them with user stories, is that they are maintained when done. On the other hand, the backlog concept, the power of the user story, they describe the increment, but it clearly describes also the story, the value it brings for the user. This is great. But what is very important to understand is that you can almost discard the user stories when they are done. As they describe the increment, there can be other user story that completely overrides the way how the feature is being exposed to the user.
Evgeny, I see on this picture that you talk about having the specification static. And I remember that I've spent in the past lots of time to create specifications, and in the end only a part of them were planned. And from my perspective, this is a waste. Is there any way to be agile on the requirement side too?
Yeah, thanks. For sure, the specifications we speak about here do not need to be prepared upfront. As I would show you later, what is important that they describe how the system works, now how it should work. This really helps to ensure this functional consistency. We'll speak about this later. What I also think is important to highlight when you speak about user stories and requirements is they are complementary. They're not really good or wrong, they are just complementary. They represent a different aspect of how we work. User stories, they are estimatable, they are small and feasible to implement, they are ordered. I don't like the hierarchical user stories. We recommend user stories to be structured in the flat list. On the other hand, requirements, they should be structured. So when we speak about specifications, we do not think about plain Word documents, but the documents where each information is uniquely identifiable and traceable. They are heavily overlapping, so it doesn't make much sense to prioritize them. It is important to prioritize user stories. For requirements, you can track the importance. I mean, categorize them as a must-have or should-have. If you do write at least some specification up front and you don't just write them as part of your implementation procedure. So how it works together. Very often there is a funnel on top that brings the business plan as an input. The business plan is an optional artifact. It is a nice mental exercise for product managers and product owners, just like for user stories, and any activity should have clear goals and acceptance criteria. Second, the epic requirements. It's much easier to gather the initial requirements in the structured specification document, as the translation into the user stories requires very special skills. To be sure they are small, but overlapping, feasible to implement. Not everybody can really perform this translation. The user stories in the backlog, they are prepared to the different scope. On the bottom I have big, roughly written stories. On the top of the backlog, there are well-formulated, small enough, and estimatable stories, just ready to be planned for the sprint. The component specifications provide supplementary documentation for user stories to ensure the product consistency. There are two possible approaches here. Really have the component specification just document how the product works, as I said, and document the changes once they are implemented, or have the analysis performed before, often together with the definition of test procedures before the actual implementation starts. It's similar to test-driven development. What I need to highlight that as well as it is important to have a potentially shippable product as an outcome of the sprint, it is important to ensure that also the product documentation is updated in the same sprint. So the component specifications are the outcome of the sprint, as well as the code and updated product backlog.
Some people think that it is enough to track the validations procedures and test cases to ensure the consistency. So can you explain why do we need to track also the requirements?
This is one of the questions. There are teams who ensure the consistency just through the documentation of test cases. But very often they are more hard to read. So sometimes it's really better to track both, because the cost to write and update requirements and test cases together is actually lower than performing the impact analysis to ensure the user stories are designed and implemented consistency just with the help of test cases. Let's go back to our problem of a scale. If you have the supported documentation for a project of 20 million lines of code, there might be maybe 50,000 of requirements. It must be really easy to navigate through all the documentation easily. This is why requirements should be traceable. And I should be able to navigate from my line of code to the requirement and from the requirement to the design documentation. It is a very big difference if I can review the impact of a possible change in one place, accessing all the available resources, access preview of UML components or a simulant system model just as part of my component specification document, rather than open all those tools separately. These are the tiny details that make a difference to be or not to be able to analyze the impact of a change request. Even if you do not actually want to change the existing functionality, but rather add other feature consistently. When I was speaking about specifications, about how we describe what needs to be done, I intentionally skipped to describe how we manage the backlogs in case you're working on different product variants, models, additions. As it demonstrates very much the complementary aspect of a requirement in the user story. For the component specifications, what you don't want to do is to distribute the changes manually, to manually ensure the consistency of your component specifications between variants. I mean, to copy and paste the actual descriptions from one variant to the other. The modern requirements management solutions allows you to write so-called 150 specification documents that contains all the common requirements and have the variant specification documents exposing the shared requirements and documenting just the different requirements. With the variant backlog, it is completely opposite. As the user stories describe just the increments, you really just document the activity specific you need to implement for each variant. Or if it is a common change, you plan it just once. It doesn't mean that the user story I have for a variant A should appear in the backlog variant B, because the addition is automatically propagated and added to the second variant. Last but not least, you are sometimes required to deliver the product specifications and all the supplementary documentation because you have to fulfill some regulatory requirements, especially when you develop software to be certified for functional safety. You're working together with NOR, a German certification authority for ISO 26262 for functional safety. By the way, the Polarion is the only AOM solution fully qualified as a trusted tool for this functional safety standard. And as you work face to face, they shared that the Polarion is the first company they certified that was actually practicing the Agile methodology, namely Scrum. The outcome of the certification was that it does not matter much when is the documentation actually written, but that it exists and it covers the full scope. They also liked on Agile the way how the software is built incrementally with continuous verification, reducing the number of functional changes, as we said before, because they shared that the most common reason for a functional issue is not that it was developed wrong initially, but as some functionality was later changed without noticing that it impacts other functionality. So their requirement is very clear. We need to demonstrate that the software units fulfill the software specifications and they do not contain any undesired functionality. Requirements were documented, tests were documented with the results. Results were traceable, and also the source code changes were verified and traceable. So actually often it means that for each software function there must be a dedicated low-level functional requirement that is actually also covered by the test case.
Actually, this section was really heavy, So you talked about eliminating waste, about tracking the requirements, impact analysis, variant management, or regulatory compliance. If there's one thing that our listeners should remember from this section, what would that be?
Sure. First, do not be afraid of embracing a change. In reality, you can actually have less functional changes than you had before. But second, when you start defining the process, do not underestimate the scale of your project, as this affects a lot of decisions. How you want to work and what tools you want to use. So the last major topic I want to cover today is about continuous integration and continuous testing. You might think it's a bit out of your scope, considering we have on the line product managers, product owners, business analysts, but the more you understand the concept of continuous integration and testing is better, because then we can better support agile teams. Sometimes it also require our support in confirming the investments into the frameworks and solutions. We already know that the continuous integration and continuous testing reduce the number of functional changes, so we can spend some resources in the setup of continuous integration and testing, and still we have more time for activities that will provide a bigger business value. This is the way how the continuous integration process diagram typically looks. How the continuous integration is presented to the public. The tester or developer writes a code or a test. They commit the changes to Subversion server or any other version control management system. It triggers a continuous integration build job. The software component is compiled, integrated with other components. The automated tests are compiled, and the tests are executed. As a result, we get a feedback if the application can be successfully compiled and the tests pass or not. From my point of view, this is very undervalued demonstration of the continuous integration value. To give you more insight of that, let's check how the continuous integration verification process can be set up. This slide shows the data structure for the previous slide. You can see that for each user story on the top of my table, there are tasks, the green items, that tracks the actual implementation activities, as well as the issues that were reported and linked to the user story. The source code modifications are linked with the user story, but with low-level tasks. Whenever the code is committed, the build is executed. What is different to the previous slide is that it is highlighted here that just some core tests are executed. Very often it is not possible to execute all the tests. It simply takes too much time. Once we start thinking about executing the performance and load tests, we speak definitely about hours. This is not wrong. We just need to ensure it is well balanced. So I get the results of the continuous integration build fast enough, not after 6 hours. In that time I can be already at home or already working on something else, but I also get the results with the confirmation that I implemented the code correctly, that I haven't broken anything else. Okay, so this was the basic continuous verification for each check-in, for each commit. But as it has a limited scope, you start asking questions about the overall life cycle of a user story and when it will be fully tested. It might be, as it is shown here, that the user story is first in the status draft, then accepted by the development team, then in progress. When it's marked as implemented, the build routine is automatically started, it compiles the application, and it executes all the tests. If it succeeds, it passes the belt for manual verification. What is the difference here between the manual verification status and the agile practice that the tester should sit with the developers soon enough to provide the continuous quality feedback to development activities? The biggest difference is that verifying each of a change, each addition, doesn't cover really the overall story. It's always important to support a continuous quality assurance feedback by the final verification and validation. It's similar to executing automated tests, as it is often not possible to automate all the regression tests, and it's not practical to execute them every day. You work on the story, they are often part just of the last phase, the story verification. Why do we care so much about what tests and when are executed? We care about it because there is a clear dependency between the cost we pay to fix an issue and the moment when the issue is actually fixed. The later it is, the more you spend, and the dependency is exponential. Because of that, we should be very careful about making wise decisions when the tests are executed, and finding a balance is pretty difficult. This is the biggest objective of continuous integration and continuous verification process that spans both automated but also manual testing. It includes the automated processing of the results. You might remember on the first slide that the users received an email that the test or build fails. But there is a difference if you receive an email or if the task appears at the developer task list, possibly linked with the user story that he or she is working on. This might save even several days, comparing to situations that the email had to be manually processed. For the ALM vendor like Polarion, the problem is a bit more difficult. As you can see on this slide from our customer Fujitsu, as they presented on our user conference, very often organizations do not rely on one single vendor or solution for all the quality assurance activities. We see that the continuous integration and testing also include elements such as static source code analysis or code metrics. All the results are and should be imported into application lifecycle management solution and transparently available to all the stakeholders. It's not only to give a proof that the verification routine passed for regulatory bodies, but also to simplify the access to the results and speed up the process. The continuous integration and continuous testing process of Polarion is set up in a way that there is one central place for all quality assurance processes. There is the same instant processing for all the test issues, no matter what kind of test fails. Is it a unit test, is it a manual test, it's a performance test, it's the same kind of processing. And the process is always closely coupled with the user story workflow. So at the end, we can guarantee that story was well tested, verified and validated without any delays. The takeaway from this chapter will be probably following. Agile is a lot about collaboration, about human interaction. But to be efficient, we need tools that they can greatly help us with automating the various tasks, such as test automation tools, but also can help us to do the right decisions and manage the core artifact lifecycle, as the quality of our products is as important as the ability to react fast and efficiently.
Thank you, Ig. So, as you've seen from Ig's examples, enterprise agility is possible. And don't be afraid to embrace the change. Think beyond the standard and basic agile methodology. Adopt it as a mindset and be free to define your work the way you'd like to. don't forget to take the scale of your information into account. This will influence the way you want to work and the tools you use. Choose the right tools to help you collaborate efficiently. The quality of your product is as important as the ability to react fast and efficiently. Ibj's examples were our customers' real challenges that Polarion helped them to solve. And here is a quote from one of our customers, Inomedic, and they said that Polarion moved our development unit to a new level. It enables us to fulfill all of our regulatory and non-regulatory requirements. Polarion provides a platform to collaborate with all our stakeholders in a very efficient and transparent way. Here are the highlights of Polarion solutions: transparency, ease of use, and efficiently. Our flexible Polarion requirements, Polarion QA and Polarion ALM products, help you increase your agility while protecting compliance. Therefore, the development teams respond faster and with better quality to business opportunities and customer demands. So now it's time for questions. So I see more here. So the first one is from Viorel. How do you propose to manage a scope change in a story in mid-sprint?
First, from our experience, the scope is always changing. So it's acceptable to, or you should embrace actually the scope change of a story in the middle of the sprint, because the story describes the actual user interaction, the value it should be delivered. And there is probably, a reason why you are asking this question, and this is how much you should rely on the sprint plan. So is it really a failure if not all the user stories are implemented in a sprint? And if you would read, the latest version of a Scrum process description, they clearly suggest that sprint scope should not be considered as a must-have requirement. So I would say it's not a problem to change the scope of a change, but it should be always discussed with the product owner, and he must approve whether the scope should be implemented as part of this change or tracked as a kind of the follow-up additional story.
We have another question from Nelson. Any product resulting from a sprint can be used in production?
Yes, it's like with the timetables, right? Of course, it's the ideal situation that that you should be able to go to the production with every sprint build. In reality, you should also not forget about the business environment. Sometimes your customers do not actually want the new builds to be distributed that frequently. So if the question is, there are two questions: whether it should go to the production, considering the business goals, and the second question is whether it should have the objectives of being able to go to the production with this build. And this is, of course, depending a lot on your environment, and especially also on maturity of your product. So probably when you start the development, it's not realistic that every build would be ready to be deployed for the production. But later, once the product is mature enough, the probability is much higher.
Thank you, Irgi. We have another question from Galina. Why are the requirements, specifications more difficult to estimate?
I think that it's a great question. And I try to answer that because what I don't like on the requirements, or it's not that I don't like that, but I told you that the requirements are very overlapping. So when you start just writing the requirements, you'll realize that they just describe different needs, but they are not structured as an increments. And I think this is the very important point, because if you will estimate the requirements, it's possible, but you cannot simply make a sum of all these estimates, because first there is no time for the possible integration of two different requirements, or there is a big overlap in the actual way how the development team will implement the requirements. How to manage that? Sorry?
Yeah, no, it's fine. We were just browsing through questions. So the next one is from Vikash. How to manage documentation as an Agile business analyst?
The nice idea of the Agile is that the teams should be cross-functional. So first, the project documentation is definitely considered as an activity that should be part of the sprint. So it's up to the Agile team to manage the documentation. It's not the external activity. Of course, the question is, who should perform that? That's tricky, because I mean, I saw teams where the roles were rotating, so even there was not a clear difference between the developer and the tester. So I think the most important message is product documentation, the component specifications should be the outcome of the sprint. You should not think about that like an external activity.
Another question comes from Gavin. What should you do if your tasks are completed for the sprint, but the sprint is not over? And this reminds me of a situation that I had in the past where I was told that the task was completed, and I just assigned something else in the backlog, and in the end I found out that actually it wasn't tested properly and it was a big issue. So what's your opinion, Ishi, about this?
What should you do if your tasks are completed for the sprint, but the sprint is not over? I think it's a great situation.
Yes.
The worst is that your tasks are not yet completed and the sprint is already over. So maybe the problem is that when the sprint ends and the user stories are just partially completed. And that's, of course, probably the most ugly situation. And what I would suggest is at least to limit this situation as much as possible. And how we suggest to do that is that you don't implement the user stories in parallel, but sequentially. So you try to start with the most important stories and close them as soon as possible. At the end, you will end up with one or two user stories that are not yet fully finished. And this is not as bad that if everything is half done.
So the next question is from Amanda. Would you agree that the Agile process is better used for multi-departmental projects that have lengthy requirements versus a smaller project that only one or two areas of the company are involved in?
No. I would say, in general, I mean, Agile is great for the small projects as well. as we said, it's very important to just review the agile practices and understand if you feel better if you would work this way. So in your case, you said that small projects that only have 1 or 2 areas of the company that are involved in. The agile processes were designed to help the customer-centric project. So you have just the customer who is paying the software development. So it might work as well. Maybe what makes sense to check is what kind of agile methodology you would like to follow. Is it more like Scrum, or you might apply just some lean principles or just Kanban? But in general, no, Agile doesn't have any limitation like that. What is the best way to move from thousands of requirements to stories and sprints?
It's a question from Alfred.
I did some Agile webinars in the past where I highlighted how important is the role of the product owner. It's again very underestimated, undervalued role. You know, I'm a product manager, and I wouldn't have time to work as a product owner for our Polarion products, because I mean I have a clear vision. I represent a customer. That's not a problem, but it really takes a lot of time to translate those requirements into user stories. How would you start? First, you should not insist on converting all of them at once. This is not needed. So first, I mean, why those thousands of requirements exist? I mean, if this is the specification you get from your client, then important is to speak with your client and consider whether he really insists on this way of collaboration, because the Agile actually start from the customer, and you shouldn't simply, of course you should at the end if the client would insist on that, but I would definitely propose on trying to collaborate with your client more and define what needs to be done first. But it's a great comment. I mean, that the translation of requirements into the user stories, it's not a simple task at all, and it takes weeks to start a project.
Thank you, Jerzy. I think our time is up. So I would like to thank you all for your attendance. And
maybe just one more comment. We have collected all your questions. The questions that we haven't answered yet, we'll try to follow up over the email or contact us at info@polarion.com. But we have your email addresses, so we will try to answer the comments tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerzy and Clara, for a very informative presentation. Thank you to everyone for attending today's Modern Analyst webinar. Please take a moment to let us know how we did. In appreciation, you'll be entered for a gift of a $100 gift card upon completion of the survey. I wanted to point out the webinar along with the slides will be archived at Modern Analyst within a few days. And this concludes today's event, so we hope you have a great day.